views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a diverse show today, starting out with homeless children in shelters who are not getting the education they deserve for a variety of reasons. We're going to be discussing that in depth. Next up, we have a state senator who's going to be talking to us about the addiction inside our prisons and what the state senator is doing to try and get treatment to those incarcerated and to prevent contraband from coming into our prisons. And finally, we have an assembly member who is going to be on the show. And the assembly member is going to be talking about youthful offender status and changing these convictions back to youth offender status so the convictions do not follow the individual for the rest of their life. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have an important topic to discuss today, and that has to do with the attendance in public school of children who are in shelters, children who are homeless. And we have with us today, Jennifer Pringle. She's the director for Advocates for Children. Jennifer, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, COVID itself made it more difficult to begin with for these children who were in the shelters, and just in terms of virtually, we know that they did not pair so well in terms of the Wi-Fi connectivity, so they're already behind the eight ball. Now they're being asked to go in person. What is the data that you see in terms of attendance, up, down, somewhere else?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for highlighting this very, very important issue. So Advocates for Children released a report earlier this week about attendance rates for students in shelter as compared to their permanently housed peers last winter and spring. And what we found was that there was a significant gap between attendance rates for students in shelter as compared to their permanently housed peers. For every month, that difference in attendance ranged anywhere from 11 to 14 percentage points. Students in shelter missed a significant amount of school last year, and that's something they can't make up. You get one shot in an education, and those days of instruction lost are days that they're not going to get back.
Do you think that was because the parent, and they had a choice of, hybrid, and sometimes going in, parents would say, well, just stay in the shelter. Do you think it's just because it was easier for parents to say, you know what, just be virtual. I don't have to take you to school. It's hard enough for me to get a taxi and to get you there or to walk you there. Let's just keep you in the shelter. We'll keep you virtual. Was that a reason maybe why they weren't attending school as often, or do we really know why they weren't there?
The connectivity issue doesn't explain the full issue, because if you look at the data, those families who opted for in-person instruction, did their attendance rates for those students was higher than for those students who were on fully remote, but it was still significantly below their permanently housed peers. So families in shelter are facing a myriad of barriers to attendance. It's not just about the Wi-Fi connectivity. And even prior to the pandemic, the rates of chronic absenteeism were 2.5 times greater than the citywide average. So for permanently housed students. So this is an issue that predates the pandemic. And what we're seeing with the start of the school year is, again, students in shelters attendance is significantly lagging the citywide rate of attendance. So it's something that the city needs to target supports for families, identify what those barriers are, and make sure they're addressing those specific barriers for families.
And how would you suggest that they do that, the Board of Education?
Well, the Department of Education is going to be getting tens of millions of dollars in federal American Rescue Plan homeless funds. So these are funds specifically to serve students experiencing homelessness. And we think that they should use part of that funding to hire 150 shelter-based community coordinators. So these would be people, Department of Education staff in shelter, who could look at the attendance data, proactively reach out to parents, explore what are the barriers to attendance, connect those parents with the needed supports that they have. There's over 200 shelters in the city. There's not nearly enough shelter-based DOE, Department of Education support for all those families and all those shelters. So they need to significantly beef up that support for families.
Well, has the Department of Education suggested that they would be amenable to having these liaisons in the particular shelters to find out who's coming and who's going and speaking to the parents and speaking to the children?
They have not publicly shared their plan for using the funds that they are expected to get. But Advocates for Children is going to continue to push. And actually, there's many other organizations in the city that also agree that the city should be using this funding for hiring additional DOE community coordinators to help better support families.
Other than the coordinators, is there any other suggestions that your organization might have in terms of increasing attendance?
Over half of families in shelter are placed in a different borough from where their kids go to school. So you're talking about parents that are making incredibly long commutes. Kids
Let me ask you about that. Is there a way, if they're in a shelter that's not in their district, can they be changed to the district where the shelter is, or
Yes.
is that not going to happen?
Yes. No, you can request a shelter transfer to be closer to your child's school. The problem is that parents in shelter have competing priorities.
Yes.
It's, go to your housing appointment or take your child to school. And if the shelter is saying you need to go to this housing appointment, something has to give. And no parent should be placed in a position of choosing between securing permanent housing and attending to their child's education.
It's like a vicious cycle
Yeah. And then, another one of our recommendations for the new administration is that whoever is elected mayor, that they convene an interagency task force with the different agencies, Department of Homeless Services, Department of Social Services, Department of Education, to really look at what are these systemic barriers that are preventing students in shelter from regularly attending school. And let's put policies and practices in place that address those barriers. For example, the shelter transfers and shelter placements. How can we ensure that families are better connected with their communities of origin so that families don't have to choose between housing appointments and school, sending their kids to school? And also too, you think about in life, things come up. There's something at work that comes up. There is, that you have to attend to. And at shelter, it's not like you can ask a family member or a friend to watch your kids while you go take care of what you need to take care of.
Yeah.
Minor children are not allowed in the shelter on their own. So there are these rules in place that prevent families from having that kind of flexibility that folks in permanent housing have. And so that means, again, oftentimes parents are taking their kids out of school because if you have an appointment, it could take 1 hour, it could take 6 hours, you don't know, but your child can't be dropped off from school or picked up from school by somebody else. You need to be there. So what that means is the parent will take their child out of school to address those other appointments.
All right, Jennifer, we're going to have to leave it there. I mean, this is an important topic. It's certainly something that we probably can't solve right now, but hopefully you can come back in the next couple of months, let us know how your organization is doing, and maybe you made some headway, and we'll see how the money's being spent.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this. Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a very good friend of the show, Louis Sepulveda here, State Senator. State Senator Sepulveda, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. We have to fight for the community and a lot of issues that we're tackling. David, my office is the busiest constituent services office in the entire state of New York. And that's because of a high needs community. So we do it with a lot of vigor and enthusiasm and commitment to the people that live here.
And you do it well, and it's important.
Thank you.
I mentioned to you even before you came on the air a little bit about the culture that seems to be focusing more on the prison industry, if that's what you want to talk about it. And today we're going to talk a little bit about contraband and addiction and inmates. Maybe you could talk to the viewers a little bit about that today, if you could.
Sure. So first of all, if you talk about contraband, most of the contraband, or a good portion of it, comes in from obviously from either the correctional officers or the staff, because the incarcerated individual doesn't have the means to get it in. Maybe family members are able to get to the security checkpoints and measures, but generally speaking, most of it has to come from the inside. And so you do have a lot of use of drugs within a facility, within a correctional facility, and that's something that comes from when they are out in the general population. 60%, and I think this is a low number, but 60% of those that are incarcerated are suffering from some sort of addiction, some sort of substance abuse problem, and or substance abuse disorder. And if we don't take care of that while they're in the system, while they're in the facility, they're going to go out and they're going to get into drugs again, and you're going to see that return to prison, which the recidivism rate that we're trying to curb by passing this bill that we just passed.
Senator, what types of contraband, illegal drugs are we seeing in the prison system more often than not?
Well, I think, first of all, even a cigarette is contraband. Obviously, you have marijuana use. In some cases, you have harder drugs. It's cocaine, it's opioids. A lot of that stuff exists within the facilities. And we have to curb the need for that, or the incarcerated individuals' need for that, to really make a difference and make the facilities what they should be. You know, David, many people believe that the incarceration system here is lock them up, put them away, it's punitive. But that's not why we created facilities here in the state. And we have to be consistent. It's about rehabilitation. And that's why we call them correctional facilities.
How do you plan on rectifying the situation with the illegal drugs?
Well, some of the facilities have metal detectors and other body detectors that can figure out where, if an individual from the outside, a family member, is bringing in the drugs. You see that at some of the facilities. But you also have to be very vigilant with the correctional staff and the correctional officers. But more importantly, look, it's really about providing addiction treatment so that we don't need drugs in our facilities. And, I'm happy to say that with my colleague in the Assembly, Linda Rosenthal, we just passed a bill that basically is going to have a major impact on the way we deal with substance abuse disorder in our correctional facilities. We're going to make the government go in line with the best practices, and then we're going to require them to do yearly data on substance abuse by incarcerated individuals, and what drug they're most addicted to and what treatment they receive. In order for us to be able to provide more targeted treatment, we have to know what the major drug is. We have to know what successful programs that they have, and the DOCS, which is the agency that handles correctional facilities statewide, they have to then gather all this data, and they have to give it to the agency, the Substance Abuse Agency, the Office of Addiction Services and Support. All of this information in terms of the drug use, the effective treatment, and so forth, all of it just has to be compiled by DOCS and then give it to the Office of Addiction Services so they can then prepare a report. And we'll get that report because the legislation goes into effect as soon as it's passed. So if we can get it done relatively quickly in January, I can get the first report and read it next year around the same time.
Listen, Senator, there's always pushback. That's the way our system works. Where are you getting the pushback, and how are you handling it?
Well, I think most of the pushback comes from those individuals who believe that our facility should be about punishment, should be about locking up the person and throwing away the key. But if you see, most of these drug addictions and issues in the incarceration facilities usually impacted Black and Brown communities. Most of the tickets that are written for bad behavior that can cause you to be put in solitary confinement although we reformed that considerably as well, are in Black and brown communities. So that population, that segment of the population, the white wealthy population, and not to engage in class warfare, but that, the numbers don't lie. Most of those that were impacted were Black and brown individuals. With respect to, for example, let's say the opioid addictions, once that started impacting the northern part of the state and started impacting white families, poor white families, then it became about compassion. Yeah. No longer lock them up and throw away the key.
Right. Once the Sackler family was identified as hooking, yes, getting all the white people addicted to the opioids, it became a national movement.
Oh, it became a national issue right away.
Where was everybody before that? Yeah,
exactly. And we want everyone to get treatment because that's the way that you can lower the recidivism rate. David, understand this: that generally speaking, when individuals are released from a facility, most of the time they don't have an apartment. They don't have, for example, a copy of their birth certificate. And I just proposed legislation that we require. I didn't just actually last cycle legislation, last legislative session, I'm sorry, where they will be required to give a birth certificate to every individual that's coming out of a facility. The now Lieutenant Governor, then Senator Brian Benjamin, proposed also legislation that requires docs to give individuals ID, some form of ID. But when they come out, they don't have housing. The stigma of an incarceration or criminal record still hurts, even though we're trying to do the ban the box. But it still hurts individuals that are coming out. So you have very little ID. You don't have housing because many of them that have been incarcerated for many years have lost track of their families. Friends have passed away. The community that they relied on is different. So they don't have anywhere to go. And then when you couple that with the fact that in many cases, they do not receive or complete their addiction treatment, then this is a recipe for disaster and a recipe for recidivism to increase. And that's something that we've been trying to work in other ways, either through the budget or policies, to get housing accommodations for individuals that are coming out of incarceration facilities. Many people say, well, why are we spending money on them? They're criminals. Well, you got to think long-term, and you got to think in terms of economics. If they go back into our incarceration facilities, they cost us over $150,000 to $300,000 a year. I'd rather use that money for programs for our community, to give free college tuition to kids in our communities that are poor that need it, rather than spending it on something that the trajectory can be changed, and individuals can get the treatment, get the housing, get what they want, get a job, and they'll never see the light of an incarceration facility again.
Well, we're going to leave it there because that's actually very well put. Senator, as usual, it's great having you on. Maybe you can check back in with us the next couple of months and see all the other wonderful things you're doing for the community.
Thank you so much, David. And I thank you for your program. It's really informative, and many people that I know watch it and tell me that a lot of times, especially when I'm on, they really enjoy it.
Of course, you're on. All right. Well, I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, David. Be well.
Stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more after this. Okay, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney David Lesch. We have with us today Alicia Hyndman, Assemblymember of 29th District. First time on. Assemblymember, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, David. How about you?
Great. Back into the criminal field here for me. Sometimes it's a little bit of a tangent. And I think it's a very, very important topic that you're discussing, having to do with youth offender status. And why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about the bill, law, and what you're looking to accomplish?
So when we raised the age in the state of New York a couple years ago, that was so that we no longer criminalized youth, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And what happened was there were a lot of individuals who, because the law had changed, who maybe were in their 30s and 40s, who were prevented from getting employment, housing, jobs further in their lives because of their criminal convictions that they had when they were younger. And as we know, as you grow, what you do at 15 is not the same. Who you are at 15, 16 years old, 17 years old is not the same as who you are at 30, 35. If I could talk about all the things I did at 15, by the grace of God, I am still here. And so this piece of legislation, and my sponsor on the Senate side from Brooklyn, Zelnor Myrie, this allows individuals who have criminal convictions, they have to go through certain measures, but they can have this eradicated from their records and go on and lead productive lives in the state of New York.
Now, were they denied initially, or was the application never made? How did that work?
This happened because it wasn't in law. We did not put this in law. And I have to give credit to Judge Zayas from Queens, who is now, I believe, on the appellate court, who had done a lot of work with youth in Queens County in criminal court with programs, and realizing that when we made this law and changed, I guess, the penal code, this group was excluded. So he brought this to our attention, and it's good to have, although he's on the bench, he understood the severity of what this did to countless individuals throughout the state of New York. And this was his idea. And obviously, that branch of government can't pass legislation. Our legislature does, and we were able to introduce this and get this passed and signed last week by the governor.
What follows you if you have a particular conviction and it's not, say, youth offender status? How does it follow you through life? Employment, background checks, where does it trail you?
So if you think about this, if you are, you said you went to law school. I went to college. I went to SUNY New Paltz, and then I went up Massachusetts to Framingham State. And although I didn't receive financial aid, if you have a record, and suppose your record included a drug charge or something, and you were a youth, it would go on your record and you would be excluded from applying for federal financial aid from the federal government. So that would exclude you from furthering your education. It could exclude you from that. It could exclude you from housing. If it was NYCHA or affordable housing or programs that give first-time homeowners, this would exclude you from that. It would exclude you from a job, applying for a job, even if you were able to pay for your own college, get further training through a vocational school. This on your record would exclude you from getting a job. And I had a young woman when we would do, because of Zoom, we did a lot during the pandemic, still the pandemic, we would do a lot of Zooms. And a young lady I was on with a campaign, I can't remember the campaign now, but one of the things she said, she's 30 years old. She interviewed for a job and everything went well, and they were going to hire her. But when they did the criminal background check, it was something that she did when she was 16 that prevented her from getting that job. And she said that job would have been life-changing for her, which is why she was part of this campaign. And one of the issues they were campaigning on was my bill, this Youthful Offender Bill.
I can't really see that there's really too much pushback that you could get for this type of law. But where did you find the pressure from? Who was pushing the other way?
I can't say that I got any of my staff received too much pressure. There were some comments on Twitter that I did notice saying that, oh, great. So someone who, all the criminals now who committed crimes when they were younger are now they have this sealed and more crime is committed. But people, this is why, reading is fundamental, and you have to read exactly what the bill says. I just want to make sure that there are certain cases, the court has the ability to consider several factors, whether relieving the individual from the burden of a criminal record would facilitate rehabilitation and successful reentry and reintegration into society. And there's a whole list that the courts have to go through, because we're not talking about someone who had a rape charge or a gun assault charge or attempted murder charge at 15 or 16. We're not talking about cases like that. And I think sometimes there is a bias from some people. It's like automatically when you have a criminal charge, it's like the worst of the worst. It is not maybe the child who shoplifted because maybe they were hungry. It is not the child who had a fight in school. It is not the child who may have, we always go to the worst. And that is what the pushback I saw on social media. But I can tell you that I didn't see any pushback from any police unions, any district attorney offices. None of that came to our offices. It's only been those who are not fully reading the scope of what this law does, and then would put that blanket statement and try to lump it in with like bail reform and all of these criminal justice issues that are prevalent, and it's particularly in my community, the community that I live and serve, not thinking about how this can really change someone's life for the better and open doors that were closed to them before.
You know, State Senator Louis Sepulveda, he's going to be on the show that you're on. I was talking to him on air.
Great guy, I like him.
It seems that prison reform and the incarcerated are really, first and foremost out there now. Many of the legislators are trying to introduce bills to reform that area of our society. Are you happy with the way it's moving, it's progressing, or do you think it's not moving fast enough?
It's not just that I am happy with the way it's progressing as far as the legislation is concerned. I am appalled at the narrative that's put out there that we're just letting criminals run the streets. We're just letting repeat offenders continue to hurt alleged victims. And what I don't think people are understanding is that when we say bail reform, it's not that if you could afford bail, you'd be out. What we're saying is that we're looking at what are the mitigative circumstances, and a judge still has the ability to do these things. They have more tools to use as electronic monitoring. There are programs that they can be put in. Just because bail cannot be used as a punishment, and that's what was happening. So the narrative's out there that if this is done, all the criminals are loose. No, that's not the case. If you are a victim of domestic violence and someone has broken a restraining order, the judge has the ability to put things in place that person does get bail. So, and I think there's a horrible, unscrupulous, uneducated media bashing against what bail reform is, and well, that is not what it certainly
has been a backlash with respect to the perception that crime is rampant, but I don't know how true that is. Anyway, it's not something we're going to solve today. Certainly,
no, it's not.
Assemblymember Hyndman, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully you come on in the next couple of months and tell us all the other great things you're doing for the community.
Say, David, thank you. Please, let's keep in touch. I think criminal justice reform is important for all New Yorkers, because you never know what someone may find themselves. We want the laws to work for everyone, not just if you have a great lawyer, great access to high-priced, So,
well put. All right, well, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, today's verdict has so much more. Stay with us right after this. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or a topic that you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know the issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.